Everyone themselves has a subjective estimate of what this thing called good versus bad sleep is. Science is a little different though, and medicine teaches us that there are essentially the 4 macros of good sleep. If you just focus on these 4 main principles, you're 80% of the way there. And you can remember it by the acronym QQRT: quantity, quality, regularity, timing. So quantity is what we used to espouse in sleep as the measure of good sleep, which is somewhere between 7 to 9 hours for the average adult, and there is variability. Most of us conflate the former for the latter, and it's potentially dangerous. So even if you're in bed for 7 hours, you're not getting 7 hours of sleep. So to get at least the minimum, according to the CDC, of 7 hours, you actually have to be on average in bed maybe about 8 hours and 15 minutes. So if you are a good sleeper, you will have what we call a sleep efficiency of at least 85%, which means of the time that you're in bed, what percent of that time are you asleep? So I think it's one of those areas that is not highlighted enough. And that's why you can actually then come on to the second of the Qs, which is quality. And that in fact is efficiency, sleep efficiency. Then my recommendation is, perhaps surprising, do not get into bed that early and do not stay in bed that late. I want to cinch you down to maybe even just 6.5 hours of time in bed. What I'm going to do by way of constraining your bedtime there is force efficiency out of your system. I build up night after night this increasing hunger where your system was lazy before, it had inefficiency. And after a while, it's essentially like hitting the reset button on your Wi-Fi router. I retrain your brain to realize I don't have 8.5, 9 hours of time in bed anymore to be lazy. All of a sudden, you've got 95% sleep efficiency, because as soon as you get into bed, you are asleep and you sleep almost through the night. Then gradually, I will step you back out. If you start to get lazy again, we stitch you back up again. And gradually, that's how we retrain the system. At that point, we've got to then start to ask if we've driven enough pressure in the system, what we call sleep pressure or sleep debt, and you are still waking up throughout the night, then we have to ask, what are you doing in your life? There's probably at least 2 things going on in the body and at least 1 thing going up in the brain. The first in the body is the balance between the 2 branches of your nervous system. One is the fight or flight branch called the sympathetic nervous system. It's very poorly named. It's anything but sympathetic. It's very agitating and activating. And then there's the parasympathetic. That's the kind of quiescent branch of your nervous system. If you're a good, healthy sleeper and you don't have too much stress in your life, you naturally switch over to that restful, quiescent branch of the nervous system. And that is the royal kind of pathway to good sleep. And the alacrity of sleep, the speed with which sleep arrives to you when you disengage from the fight or flight branch, is really speedy and rather beautiful. If you are so wired, though, however, the sympathetic, the fight or flight branch is activated, your heart rate is jacked, your blood pressure is too high, your temperature, because of that activated state, your core body temperature is also too high. If you are too hot, your heart is racing, and your blood pressure is high, it's very difficult for you to fall asleep. Add atop of that a second system in the body, which is what we call the HPA axis, or it's essentially the stress axis, which releases adrenaline. All of a sudden, you are cortisol flooded. Now, this is not you're anxious, but you're still wired. Cortisol is streaming, your heart rate is jacked. In the modern world, we're constantly on reception. And now the only time, based on modernity and how it inflects us, that we do reflection is when our head hits the pillow at night. That's the worst time to do reflection. When you ruminate, you catastrophize. Everything seems twice as bad in the dark of night versus the light of day. So the principal one is that you've got to process that. And this is the hard part of the equation. Mental health work is tough work. You can take medications, and that can be one path for people. You can take certain medications that can try to lower your heart rate, shift you back over into that quiescent state. But most people don't want to reach for a pill immediately necessarily. One thing you can do is just catharsis. 2 or 3 hours before bed, not right before bed, pad of paper and a pen, and just write down. I just want you to vomit out all of your stresses and anxieties. And it turns out that simply doing that will decrease the time it takes you to fall asleep by 50%. So the first thing is just get it all out of you, so it's not inside of you. That said, you can still be burdened with this egregious kind of stress and anxiety nevertheless. So what do you do about that? At that moment in time, whether it's you falling asleep or you've woken up at 3 a.m. and it's happening and you need to get back to sleep, at that point, let's get your mind off itself. That is the goal. How do you do that? Maybe at least 4 things. First, meditation. Next one is breath work. If that isn't your thing, you can do a body scan. The final thing, if none of those appeal, mental walk in hyper detail. If you look across all 4 of the things I've just described, the commonality is that they all get your mind off itself, because sleep at that time of night is a little bit like trying to remember someone's name. The harder you try, the further you push it away. So QQ, next one is regularity. Going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time. Part of the reason is because you have a 24-hour master clock in your brain. And that clock thrives under conditions of regularity. And when you feed it signals of regularity, like going to bed and waking up at the same time, it improves both the quantity and the quality of your sleep. There was a great study, and it was, I think, over 300,000 individuals that they tracked with sleep assessments over a good period of time. And then they looked at them across a much longer lifespan period of time. And they looked at mortality risk. And they also looked at different forms of mortality risk, cancer mortality risk, cardiovascular disease mortality risk. And they measured sleep quantity. Sure enough, just like we've seen in many other studies, using that sweet spot of 7 to 9 hours, the shorter your sleep, the shorter your life. Short sleep predicted all-cause mortality. That's the quantity measure. They looked at regularity. Regularity demonstrated the same thing. Those who were in the lowest quartile, those who were least regular, highly erratic, they had far higher rates of mortality relative to the people who were in the top quartile, who were incredibly regular. And you've also got to ask yourself the question at some point, what is it that I want out of life? Because I think so often in life, the professional gun goes off and you're off into the rat race. And the thing is, even if you win the rat race, at the end of the day, you're still a rat. So why not just stop and look up and firstly ask, do I even want to be running in that direction? And do I want to be this physiologically kind of distraught person by way of that run, that this life is enacting on me? So QQRT, timing sounds like regularity, and you think, hang on a second, that's the one and the same. It's not. Timing is your chronotype. Are you a morning type, evening type, or somewhere in between? Because it is largely genetically determined. There are at least 22 different genes that dictate your morningness or your eveningness. And when you sleep in synchrony with your chronotype, you get a beautiful distribution of quantity and quality. When you fight against your biology, you normally lose. And the way you know you've lost is typically disease, sickness, and bad sleep. And I would say that one of the most sensitive faculties that takes a nosedive like a dart into the ground when you are even sleep shortened versus totally sleep deprived is your mood and your emotional stability. And sleep is almost like a set of emotional windscreen wipers, that it just adds the rose back into the tint of your life glasses every single day. And there's a lovely quote by an American entrepreneur, E. Joseph Kosman, and he once said that the best bridge between despair and hope is a good night of sleep.